I don't know if y'all have noticed, but this is the first Rules Committee meeting we've had this session. Well, no. The meeting we normally have at 9 is the Committee on Rules. This is the Rules Committee, just like any other standing committee, and this is the committee that we listen to legislation on, just like you would in a lot of your committees. It's the one we vote yes or no on, and if it passes, then it goes to the clerk, and the clerk gets to read it this morning, and then it'll be assigned to the Committee on Rules. So just a little information for you. Now, another little bit of information for you. I don't need enemies if I got friends like this. Okay. Okay. I'm on, let's see, who I want. Chairman Hawkins, would you open us with prayer, please, sir? You want to push your button?
Please bow your heads. God, help us today. Lay your hands on us. Help us to make good decisions for this state and for the people that we serve. Bless everyone in this room and in this house and in this building. Give us your wisdom and let us do what we need to do for the best of everyone. Amen.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we have House Bill 675. It's a substitute for 675. I'm going to ask Chairman Cantrell if he'll come up to the podium and present his bill and give us a chance to ask some questions if we have any.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, good morning. When I first got elected, I kind of got elected in a whirlwind, and I never thought to ask how much we got paid for this job. And when I found out, frankly, I was appalled at the low number that it was. And I made a decision at that point in time that in my last term, when it would not benefit me personally, I would introduce legislation to raise the pay of legislators to a level, at least a respectable level. So this is my last term, so I bring to you House Bill 675. The reason is not just to raise pay. You know, the scriptures say that a workman is worth his hire, and we need to open it up so that more Georgians can have the possibility of public service, especially in the General Assembly. And it shouldn't cost money to serve. We lose some of our best every year I've been down here because they can't afford to serve, because some actually lose money in the process of trying to serve our great state. So that's why I bring this bill today. I went to the Speaker back in the fall and told him this is what I desired to do. He wanted to make sure the process was vetted properly, and so he appointed a working group, a bipartisan working group, to examine pay scales at all levels and to come to you with a recommendation today. Now, remind you, this bill would not go in effect until 2023. So all of us, now I'm not standing for re-election, but all of you will have to stand for re-election between now and the time of the effectiveness of this bill. Why? Why are we doing this? Several reasons. Number one, legislators have not received a salary adjustment since the 90s. It's been well over 20 years since our salary was addressed in any meaningful way. And the reasons for that are kind of obvious, because the optics of voting to raise your own pay are difficult, even when they're fair, because we know what the headline in the newspaper will likely read if and when we do this. Legislatures similar to our state receive an average of $41,000 in salary according to the House Budget and Research Office. The formula that was used by a state compensation commission also suggested a salary of around $41,000, even though their recommendation is $29,908. So we, as a working group, we decided to go with the state compensation commission's recommendations exactly, which is 25%, over 25% lower than the average overall of legislatures our size nationwide. Why do we deserve this pay raise? Well, one reason is the size of our districts has increased considerably since a lot of people got elected, especially since the 90s. And a reasonable pay increase would open up the possibility of public service in the legislature for more Georgians. Right now, when you look around the chamber, it appears that it's limited to the rich, the poor, those who are married to someone with a good salary, and people like those of us in this room this morning who love our state so much that will serve no matter what. So the bill does three things. It follows the 2017 recommendation of the State Compensation Commission exactly when it comes to the salaries of the General Assembly and all other constitutional officers. The working committee determined that if we were going to do this, we might as well do this across the board and make pay more fair across the board. We took the commission's recommendation a few years ago. Many of you will remember when we raised the governor's pay to something more commensurate with the level of the job. This bill does it across the board, and it also indexes the pay so that hopefully we'll never have to address this subject again. It allows the Legislative Service Committee to come up with an appropriate indexing of like the CPI, of the salaries so that they will fluctuate appropriately. It also indexes the per diems that the Georgia General Assembly members receive. And then thirdly, in order to try to bring some equity to the distance that some members have to drive, it gives an additional $1 for every mile over 100 miles of your round trip to the Capitol. So those of us who live within 50 miles, like myself, I live 39 miles. It's the perfect wrong distance, but nothing will change for us. But those over 50 miles who have over 100-mile round trip will receive $1 extra. And the thinking on that is that some members spend a whole lot more time in their vehicle driving back and forth, and they're not compensated for their time. They're just reimbursed for the mileage. Now, I have not received an official fiscal note, but the fiscal note on this is pretty easy to calculate. And if my math is accurate, it's about $3.2 million for the year. If you look at the actual compensation report, the recommendation from them, let me just go over this real quickly because they have a very strict rationale. If you've seen this report, it's pretty thorough. It's 20 or so pages of how they came up with the figures they came up with. But basically it represents a 19% pay increase for all the constitutional officers, the Secretary of State, Attorney General, State School Superintendent, Commissioner of Insurance, Agriculture, and Labor. And then for the Public Service Commission, they actually received a 2% raise in 2017, so it recommends a 17% raise for them so that all of those positions are at 19. The commission also found that the President pro tem and the Speaker pro tem, that they deserved a salary supplement of $6,000 for the additional responsibilities that they have. And then it recommended the General Assembly pay at $29,908. And then looking at the Lieutenant Governor and the Speaker of the House, there was really, their salaries are so out of whack because of the way they've been done that they couldn't just give them a percentage raise. So they just looked at across the states our size, what would be a equitable salary for those full-time positions, and they recommended $135 for both of those positions. This bill does not address retirement. I want to be clear on that. Ledge Council recommended that I not address retirement in this bill because it's in a different code section. But my commitment to the members of this committee is that if and when this bill passes, that I will introduce a separate bill that addresses the retirement issue and brings our retirement in line with the new pay scale. So basically, retirement would increase proportionally to the increase in the salary that's in this bill. And with that, I'll stand for any questions if there are any, Chairman Smith. Yes, sir. Any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Lighting up. Who's number 40 over there? Chairman Smyrie, you got the floor.
Representative Cantrell, let me just say this to you and all those of you all that are working on the committee. I commend you. This is very comprehensively done. You've touched on the major issues. I remember when last time we had a House pay raise, we were connected to the state employees, and when they got a raise, the General Assembly received a raise. But when we sent it to the Senate, they cut it to 50%. In other words, we would get half of what the state employees got, and then eventually we cut that out. So the way you have put that in, that legislative services and others would have some authority over that, I think is the right way to go, and the methodology fits the situation. So I want to commend you and thank you all. When I was on the executive committee at NCSL, I used to travel the state a lot, I mean United States, and I saw what the other legislators were, salaries were, and during that time, and I was just appalled that because what it does, it cuts a lot of people out to be able to serve.
Yes.
I mean, because it's a tremendous sacrifice for those who do not have, the jobs and that sort of thing, and it puts a limitation on it unless you're in some sort of business or in another type of profession. So I think this goes a long way. When I was elected, the salary was $2,400, $2,000 a month. It was $2,400, so a year. I'm sorry, $2,400 a year. And it went to $3,600, and then it went, now we're at where we are now. And so I think this is something that we ought to take a very comprehensive look at, and I'm delighted that you're doing it across the board, so that it would have effect to those others that are serving and following that commission. So I commend you, and I know Representative Williams has been talking about this, and others. I commend you all on this committee for coming forth with what I consider a very comprehensive and a very well done document and bill.
Thank you, Dean Smyrie. I would also say that the minority leader, when we formed our working group, I went to the minority leader, Beverly, and asked him to pick 4 from his caucus to serve. I picked 5 from our caucus, and I will say there has never been more rabid agreement between Republicans and Democrats than there was in the room discussing this topic. And I also want to say that there is a similar, I've not looked at the details of it yet, but Senator C has a very similar bill coming out of the Senate. I need to analyze it to see how similar it is to ours. I know it follows the recommendations of the commission, and she has 19 sponsors on that bill, bipartisan. So I think there's the appetite to do this year, and since I won't be here to benefit from this, I think if we don't do it this year, it may never happen, and I think it's very appropriate and easily defensible.
Okay, who's 34? Lee, somebody's took all. Oh, there they are. Who's 34? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Got a question, and I'm trying to read through this real quick. It's the first time I've seen this, so I apologize. But this seems to be some confusion about per diems, and maybe you can help me understand this. I've heard that we have, 7 days or 8 days of per diem. I've heard that chairmen have more than that. Can you clarify that for me? I'm sure it's in here somewhere, but
I can't. I don't know exactly what all the different rules are. I know, but the heart of this was to index the per diem so that we wouldn't have to address that again, and also to make it more fair for those who drive from far away. But I don't know. I don't know the specifics of all the rules.
Because as far as being tough on legislators, we do so much out of session now. I mean, it's at least once, twice a week, and
Agree.
that takes us out of our business. And there's one thing about a salary increase would increase the per diem days. Like many of our commissioners have 12 and 16 days a month, and we're looking at just a few a year. Just We have 10, is that what it is? And that's for everyone? I've heard this debate. Chairman have more? No, they don't. It's all 10, but, yeah. Okay. Well, it's just a thought, something I've.
And I would certainly be
thought
open, if this committee chose to amend the bill accordingly, I'd certainly be open to that.
Okay, Representative Hughley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the author of the bill, thank you for the work of your committee. I want to be clear because whether we gave ourselves a raise of $29,000 or $50,000, the press is going to be the same. So why did you all go conservative?
Could you repeat the last part?
I said that the press is going to be the same, whether it's $29,000 or $50,000, and you said the average was $41,000. So it appears that you all went very conservatively in doing this. That's just a statement. I don't expect you to answer that, but I do want to be clear that in on line 302, where you talk about how the percentage increase is going to be calculated so that legislators won't have to do this again, and it will continue, because we're going to start out behind, so that means we're still going to stay behind our peers as we move forward. So would you go over that section again about how that increase is going to be calculated and who's going to be responsible for that?
Well, it's on, let's see, I wrote that down. Line 70, I believe, addresses that. The legislative services, if you look on line 70, so it's in 2024 because we'll have been in this for a year. So they'll be looking at it. It's a biennial. It'll happen every 2 years. So the Legislative Services Committee shall adopt a method for determining annual inflationary index rates which reflect the effects of inflation and deflation on cost of living for residents of this state for a given calendar year for use in this division. So it gives several options there as to what they might do. There was some hesitancy to attach it to the CPI index because of the fluctuation of that. So it gives a little bit of flexibility there for the Legislative Services Committee to pick the index that's most appropriate every 2 years to adjust the salary. And may I say, I'm completely with you. We just felt like we needed to go with the commission's recommendation. I would be open to an amendment if you guys wanted to change that number. I think it's easily doable. But the protection of the fact that we didn't come up with this number on our own, it was a number recommended by the Compensation Commission, I think is a fair argument.
Chairman Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was simply going to try to answer Dr. Hawkins' question about per diems. As Representative Williamson mentioned, members of the House are allowed 10 days of per diem, which means whether you're coming to the Capitol or going somewhere else in Georgia to deal with constituent work or legislative work, you're allowed per diem and mileage for that. Chairmen of committees and members of the Democratic and Republican leadership in the House are also allowed additional per diem days when they are doing work related to their job. In other words, obviously, if you're the majority leader or the minority leader, you're going to be asked to be at the Capitol and other locations numerous times, and you can take a per diem day if you are here working on that. If you are chairman of a committee and your committee or a portion of your committee, even just the chairman, are asked to be at the Capitol or somewhere else to work, you can take a per diem day for that. I know, for example, if you're chairman of the Judiciary Committee, there are several times in the year that you're asked to come to Atlanta and meet with judges and other officials or talk to members of the bar. I'm sure if you're the chairman of the Agricultural Committee or a member of it, you may be asked to come to Atlanta to meet with the Agricultural Commissioner or the Georgia Farm Bureau. So that's how it works. Every member gets some per diem. Every chairman has ability when they're doing committee work to grant per diem to the committee members.
Okay, Chairman Knight. Okay. I'll try.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think in regards to Representative Hughley's question regarding, why the number, and maybe it's perhaps low. But again, I think as I read this bill, and I'll have that question for Arthur, it still remains that we are a citizen part-time legislature. And that in essence, the salary that's set now was determined when, 20-something years ago?
In the 90s. It was the late 90s.
In the 90s. And so I think, as I read this bill, and I'll ask Arthur for his opinion as he wrote it, this is just getting it up based on, it's been 20 years since this has been looked at, but it still is reflective of the fact that we are still a citizen legislature. This is not a full-time job per se for the rank and file member.
That's accurate, Chairman Knight. We do have to consider the fact that it is a part-time job, even though the hours are so difficult. It's really full-time January, February, March, and then some. And so it's a very strange, I don't know if there's any other part-time job that, that compares. Nonetheless, the number was not to reflect a full-time salary.
Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a couple of clarifications. First, I appreciated being on that committee. And a point of clarification, when the dean spoke about where his salary was when he came in, to clarify, there was a supplement for Moses. So we have to certainly, we have to make sure and say that. But one thing I wanted to say particularly is being a citizen's to a great degree, citizens' legislature ended with social media. When I went to work for Zell Miller in 1975, when you left home, folk couldn't talk to you until you got to Atlanta. And if they didn't know where you were staying, they couldn't even leave a message. Now, Walmart, Target, you have offices everywhere. And Sunday morning, I've had folk come to my house and knock on my door. That is not the mark of
Well,
a
you
citizen.
shouldn't be answering it. You should be in church.
No, we don't go we didn't go as early as y'all go.
Okay.
So, but and finally, to the point, for per diems, when this session ends, like all sessions, but more so, I have about 7 counties that will call me that I will be talking to. No, they don't vote for me, but they have the right to question me, and I'll go visit them. In almost 20 years now in the legislature, I have never filed a committee day or mileage for anywhere but Midway to Atlanta. So all these I get to eat, and it goes year round. I want folk to know that it's a citizens' legislature, and maybe they'll let me be a citizen sometimes.
And Chairman Smith, I'll say that I work at a church, and I have to remind my folks almost every Sunday, this is a politics-free zone. I'm here to worship, not to talk about politics, so it happens everywhere.
Okay, Chairman Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question on line 35 about the extra money for mileage. And I don't have a dog in, when traffic used to be bad, I lived 19 miles from the Capitol, and it often took an hour and a half for me to get here.
Oh, yeah, me too.
So there is something, but that is not, I understand what you're trying to get at. But in addition to mileage, so if they're over 100 miles, they're 400 miles, they get the mileage if it's 53 or 55 cents. So they would get that for the 400 miles or whatever it was.
Yes, ma'am.
Plus $1 on top of it
Yes, ma'am.
for anything over 100. Okay.
I understand that the Madam Chair's, we were trying to figure out a way to, and maybe this isn't the best way, but this is the best we could come up with to make it equitable for someone who drives 3 hours to a committee meeting here at the Capitol and the person who drives 20 minutes but receives the same pay. Because remember, the mileage reimbursement is a reimbursement. There's no pay in that. That's the government issued wear and tear on your car. So we're trying to figure out a way. And then additionally, a person who drives that far is typically going to have to get a hotel room to spend the night in as well. So there's that additional expense that
Was
they
there
have.
any consideration, since that's really what per diem, of just upping the per diem for people?
Yeah, we talked about that as well, just upping the per
That
diem,
traveled.
having 3 tiers. This is what we landed on. I'm certainly open if someone has a better way to address the issue. We're trying just to address the equity of that, that's all.
Thank you.
One of the issues as it relates to travel, some of these people have a 5-hour drive one way. You have a 5-hour drive one way. Time you do a round trip, you've just shot a full day. So I think that's one of the reasons that this part was in there. Who's 50? Okay, Chairman Martin.
Thank you. To that end, I'm not sure, we're measuring from the Capitol. I would point out that if somebody from a metro area is required to go to an offsite meeting, if I would go down to Columbus, to Chairman Smiley's district to hold a meeting, or to the coast, you incur that same lengthy drive. It might be something to consider. Not just if you live within 50 miles of the Capitol, I understand that. We're already taxed different if you live in, it's not true that if you live in 50 miles of the Capitol, that mileage is taxed. But if I drive to Savannah, it's still taxed because I'm not around. So just a thought there. The second thing I'd like to ask the gentleman is it not true that with our districts being larger, especially with the things we've experienced during the pandemic, the constituent requirements, was there any thought given to additional monies for office operation, even if it was specifically limited that it had to be for staffing for constituent service? It couldn't be converted to anything other than that. Isn't it true? I'm concerned that with as Representative Williams said, with being on call all the time, many of the constituents I spoke with this summer assumed we had staff like Congress people did. And they didn't understand why it was taking days sometimes to get back with them. And isn't it true that I'm concerned not just the salary, but how do we service the constituents?
Right.
Paying me more doesn't make me twice as available, but adding money into that area would be service. I just asked the gentleman if that was considered.
Well, the chairman makes a great point, and it was considered, and we talked about it, and we had a very short window of time to present this bill. It felt like we had to go simple with it to begin with, and that maybe we could address the staff issues in a separate bill if necessary. But that's a very fair point.
Okay. I don't see any more questions. Several of the comments that have been made, just a couple of them I'd like to comment on. I don't know of anybody who's here, regardless of their job, regardless of their family situation, or regardless of anything, that they don't lose money. And I can tell you, when you've got young children, and I know of several legislators who came here with some really young children, it's really difficult for them to lose 3 months out of the life of that young child. Mm-hmm. And even at that, I know of some legislators who have quit just because of family situations. They wanted to be around where their kids were growing up. And several of y'all know some of these people. So I understand this. And, a lot of us are on a short glide path. I'm not going to be around here much longer if I get elected next term or whatever. So, but some of y'all got some time, and it's going to be important. But it also opens up some opportunities for people who say, well, you know, I can't go up there for $17,000. My family situation or any of this will not allow it, just because of financials. Because if you're young and you've got young kids, it's expensive. You know, the cheapest thing about having a kid is when it's born. After that, it really gets expensive. But like I say, I've known several who just said, I can't do this for this 3 or 4 months just because of the kids. And I've had several who've told me that they cannot do this just because of the financial hardship it's placed on them. But we've lost some really good legislators over the last few years just for that reason. Chairman Hatchett.
Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time, I move do pass on HB 671.
Well, right now is the appropriate time, so you can stop listening to me. Okay, I got a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, like sign. Motion carried. Very good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. I guess we can adjourn this meeting, and we'll start the next meeting of the Committee on Rules. Now, we have 3 substitutes to consider. House Bill 60, whose is that?
60 is Wes.
Okay.
60.
Okay. Yeah.
That's Wes.
Okay. Y'all have to do it. One of y'all have to do it. And since this is a rule substitute, Speaker Pro Tem, I believe, will present it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only change that was made is that the cap for the would not go up for any year that QBE is not fully funded.
Okay. So the bill is the same except for that language that she just mentioned. Any questions? Okay. Here a move do pass. Got a move and a second. All in favor say aye. All opposed, like sign. Okay, all opposed, raise your hand. 4, 5, 6. It passed. Thank you. So that's LC 490485S passed. That a rule substitute. All right, House Bill 454 substitute LC 338735S. Dr. Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The substitute bill, this is the continuity of care bill. If a patient picks an insurance plan with in-network providers and those are removed in the middle of the calendar year, in the original version, the patient would still get covered at that provider to the end of the calendar year. This one tightens that up a little bit and makes it either the end of the calendar year or 90 days, whichever is shorter. It's a step in the right direction to help patients have some continuity during these sometimes contentious negotiations between providers and insurers, and takes the patient out of the middle.
What you mean contentious negotiations?
I'm sorry, maybe vigorous is the.
Well, I think contentious is contentious and vigorous contentions. I tell you what, you have never seen such battles as what goes on between hospitals and insurance companies. I mean, it's a small war. Okay, we got a motion on the floor for LC 338735S. Do I hear a second? All in favor say aye. All opposed, like sign. Okay, LC 338735S passed. Okay. Substitute for House Bill 588.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Substitute, it's from the Freight and Logistics from the Transportation Committee. What we did, Legislative Council and the Department of Audits had a little conflict on some language in Section 7, and we clarified it. That's all it does.
Okay, so we have a motion to do pass?
Please.
Okay, got a motion and a second for LC 392980S to do pass committee substitute, Rules Committee substitute. I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. That passed also. Thank you. Okay, now, there's a real good chance that we may get back together this afternoon. I want you to earn that 17,000. Yeah, I'm not referring to lunch either. We'll probably get back together a little bit later this afternoon, I hope, so that we won't have to deal with this late Friday. Because I know some of those who have some of these 5-hour drives, if we don't get finished till late Friday, they may not be able to go home. So, meeting's adjourned. I'll see you a little later.